All good? Distinguished guests, please remain in your seats. The next session will commence momentarily. أعزائي الحضور، سوف نبدأ بعد قليل. I would like to ask the speakers of this next panel to come up to stage, please. It's all right. I would like to ask the speakers of the panel to come up to stage. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now commence our next session of the program titled The Role of International Aid in an Era of Conflict. It is moderated by Gemma Bauscher, the co-lead for Global Health Security at the Center for Conflict and Health Research, King's College London, who will introduce the panel. Thank you.
Welcome everybody. I'm delighted this morning to welcome all of you for this panel on the role of international aid in the era of conflict, in an era of conflict. And I'm even more delighted to welcome this distinguished panel of speakers. And I'm sure we're going to have a very lively and topical conversation today. So today I will introduce our guests. We welcome His Excellency Thomas Seiler, the Ambassador of the European Union to the Republic of Iraq. We welcome Lahieb Higel from the International Crisis Group, who's the Senior Analyst for Iraq. We welcome Ghulam Mohammed Isaksai, the Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General for Iraq, UNAMI. We welcome Tanya Gili Kailani, the co-founder and vice president of the Seed Foundation. Welcome. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Hyde Hyde, a consulting fellow from the Chatham House Middle East and North Africa program. So welcome to you all. We're going to begin by jumping to Lahieb and focusing on the issue on everybody's minds today, and specifically, of course, the issue of Gaza. The issue of humanitarian access recurs in the Gaza context. And Lahib, I wonder if you could reflect on the key challenges as you see them today and in Gaza regarding humanitarian access, and where you think we might begin to start making some headway on this very fragile situation. Lahib.
Thank you very much, Gemma. Thank you very much for the organizers of the Sulh Forum. So as the Iraq analyst, strangely, I will talk about Gaza, but it's because I've been working on the humanitarian situation there for the past 6 months. A very depressing case, as you might all know. Shocking to the degree of where we have reached in terms of now famine imminent, specifically in the north of Gaza. And we all know at the back, of course, of the horrific attacks of 7 October, the reaction of Israel was quite unprecedented, also in contrast to the previous wars that it has waged in the Strip, 2008, 2014. We haven't seen the limit of humanitarian access that we have today. So 6 months in, how did we end up in this situation, and why this difficulty for humanitarians to reach those in need? Of course, there's a combination of a set of political obstacles, to some degree also technical obstacles. Initially, it started by the land crossings to Gaza being closed down by Israel. Most of the aid and the commercial traffic that used to make it into the Strip came through Israel. Overnight, most of that had to shift to Egypt. The one border crossing that we have into the Strip from Egypt doesn't have the capacity of the land crossings from other parts of Israel into Gaza. And so there has been a heavy load on the Egyptian side to facilitate aid into the Strip. Partially, there's been a capacity issue on the Egyptian side that took a couple of months to ensure that the UN could set up the capacity on that side. But to this day, the main hampering of the access is unfortunately on the Israeli side. We saw a brief respite during the truce at the end of November, but largely the siege has continued. This includes stopping the essential services that Israel used to provide, including electricity, including water, but also access for aid trucks to make it in. And I think what has been the most starking challenge here for many humanitarians has been to negotiate almost on every item what makes it in. And today that makes a difference in terms of life and death for Palestinians that are trapped in the Strip. And I'll give a few examples. Dual-use goods are seen as one of the big threats for Israel in terms of the ability for Hamas to potentially use items that are dual-use as components for weapons. There hasn't been any clear evidence of this happening, and yet to this day it's very difficult for humanitarians to get a clear list of what is admittable into the Strip and what is not, to the degree that food cans or tuna cans can't make it in because tin could potentially be used for IEDs. And that goes into the most complex components of medical equipment, for instance. I haven't even talked about the hostilities themselves, but this is simply just on the humanitarian side, on getting the basic goods in. Food, same thing. There is no access right now to a regular market. Within a couple of months, most of the commercial shops had emptied their stocks in Gaza. And today, although there is aid in great supply, there are thousands of trucks in line to get into the Strip, but they cannot have access simply because of restrictions on inspection and the debate on whether certain items can be used for several purposes. The other main challenge, I think, in this conflict, has been also in other places, but particularly here, has been the lack of deconfliction possibilities for the humanitarian sector between those that are conducting operations on the ground and the humanitarian community. The main channel here has been Kogat, which is a civilian authority essentially, that pre-7 October had a good communication with the humanitarian community, but that was also a stable situation. Since then, most of this notification system hasn't been working effectively. Why? Because when humanitarians notify this authority about locations that are there for humanitarian purposes to provide shelter or distribution sites, or even for movements, they do not get a so-called green light for a movement specifically. And so therefore we've ended up in a situation where those that are leading operations on the ground, the IDF, have not had that information necessarily. It has taken about 6 months, and unfortunately, only until international staff of the World Central Kitchen were killed in Gaza, an organization that Israel was working with closely, then we saw a switch in the understanding that deconfliction is a key component in order to facilitate humanitarian operations. We're yet to see the improvement here, but that will be one of the key components in order to make sure that the support actually makes it to those most in need. And on the last point that I will raise here is also the issue that we've seen in the last few months on internal distribution. I'm sure that you've heard of several cases where public order has broken down to the degree that desperate people are either running over the aid convoys that actually make it in, or that are shot at. And one of the primary issues in this case has been the fear of Israel allowing any sort of entity, civilian police, civic organization, that have the closest, any resemblance of ties with Hamas, to facilitate or protect aid convoys. However, in many other situations where you have belligerents engaging in hostile activities, usually you would have an understanding between humanitarians that are to deliver aid to a certain spot to be protected by parties to the conflict. It is not something that is unusual. But in this case, it has been very difficult to convince the Israeli side that this can be done without posing a threat to Israel in terms of Hamas's capabilities. So I think these are the main issues that I would raise in terms of how difficult it has been and why we've ended up in a situation where the IPC has called for the highest level of food insecurity and a famine in the north of Gaza. Thanks.
Thank you, Lahib. Thank you for that contribution. May I take the opportunity to encourage the audience to send in their questions as well, and I will endeavour to ask them. But we turn from Gaza now to Syria, now in its 13th year of a protracted conflict. So, Dr. Hyde, you have a long-standing focus on Syria, where the politicization of aid has been an issue since the start of the conflict. How has this politicization played out on the ground? And after 13 years, do you see any meaningful routes to countering those effects?
First of all, thank you, and I would like also to thank the organizers for having me here. Let me start by basically illustrating how my remarks will be structured. I think it'll be important to talk about specific examples and challenges and how aid has been weaponized in Syria, but it's also to take a step back and talk about some of the structural flaws that actually allowed that to continue and not only be be implemented in Syria or happen in Syria, but also to be repeated elsewhere, whether we're talking about Gaza or we're talking about Ukraine or many other conflicts. Now, starting with the challenges, there are different ways that a government or regime or an actor could basically prevent aid access to specific locations. And one of them is what we're seeing in Gaza. The same thing happened in Syria where the Syrian regime did not allow aid access or did not provide aid access to areas outside of its control. And although we have seen that in other areas, the regime has managed to basically take it a step further and started using aid access as a weapon in order to gain military achievements. And one of the examples here is that, for example, in rural Damascus, they started using a strategy that many Syrians started referring to as a ju' or a ruku', which means starve or surrender. So an area will be besieged for months or years until people there decide that there is the only way for them to get access to food is to, say, we surrender, and they will allow regime forces to enter. Now, when it comes to, this is one of the direct ways to prevent aid from reaching its designated destination, but you have many indirect ways to achieve that. One of them would be by targeting aid convoys or hospitals. We have seen that in Gaza. So what you are making here, or what you're doing here, is basically making the environment riskier for aid organizations to actually be able to operate. So you don't have to every single time say no. By making it riskier, you don't have to say no. They will not be able to actually feel that it's safe for them to go and operate. And then you have another way, especially in Syria, where UN agencies as well as INGOs, they have to do everything in cooperation with the regime, and I will talk about this at a later stage. So for every aid operation, they have to submit an request, and that request, if it's not approved, they will not be able to go and deliver. So the regime could use one of two responses. One of them is say no from the beginning. The other will not actually respond to the request. So either way, those aid operations will not be implemented. And then you go to the second one, which is the challenge is when the regime starts actually exploiting aid operations for its own advantage or to collectively punish its opponents. One of the clear examples here is that the regime for many years in Syria was forcing UN agencies and INGOs to use a lower exchange rate. And by doing that, and at some point it was like 50% less than the actual value of the dollar at the local market. So what the regime managed to do by simply saying that or implementing that law or procedure is that they managed to get hundreds of millions as direct funding from UN agencies and INGOs in Syria. Another way is by telling them you cannot operate in this area or provide services in this area, but you have to provide services in this area. So in a way, it's using it as a stick and a carrot at the same time. Stick against its opponent and carrot in order to reward the communities that are considered loyal to Assad personally in this case. And the problem of this is that many donors, they started becoming more and more reluctant to provide services. So that reduced the amount of funding that UN agencies in regime-controlled areas used to get their hands on. Now, moving beyond specific examples here and there, I think that there are two structural problems that have allowed the regime in Syria, as well as many other regimes, to actually exploit and take advantage of aid operations in general. One of them is related to how the UN system is structured, and I'm talking about that because I used to work for the UN before inside Syria. So I have a bit of an understanding of how the internal sort of decisions are making, but also when it comes to dealing with the government in the areas those agencies are operating in. So the main issue here is that the system itself is built around dealing with states and respecting their sovereignty. And that's for sure, it's important to respect sovereignty of states. And the problem becomes more apparent or more clear when there's a conflict. And in the case of Syria, you have a regime that killed hundreds of thousands of its own citizens, used chemical attacks, bombard infrastructures, and used all the different types of crimes you could even imagine. Nonetheless, UN agencies have no option but to go and cooperate with that regime. So this is one of the issues, and the issue here right now that we need to think about later on is, okay, the regime itself, as in the structure itself, has to start thinking about, okay, we are not only operating in areas where there is no conflict. Now you have to cooperate or at least deal with states that are parties to the conflict. So this will require more thinking in order to say, okay, then there is a rule and there is exceptions. Right now, we did not reach that point yet. Now, the other issue is related, and I will end with that. I know I'm running out of time. Is related to the mentality of the mentality that especially aid agencies have when they are operating in an emergency or conflict areas. The mentality is anything is better than nothing, meaning that even if I'm not able to support or provide aid to the majority of the people, for as long as I'm able to provide support for, I don't know, 10, 15%, that's better than nothing. And in general, people would be able to understand why that's the case, because for sure, helping people is good. However, you have to think about the consequences of those trade-offs, because when you allow regimes like the Syrian regime in Syria to exploit that and then start using it in different ways, what you are basically doing here is that first, you are contributing indirectly to some of the violations committed by that regime, but also you are encouraging other actors in different countries to also follow suit and do the same. So you are basically allowing them to take advantage of the system with impunity. And I think this is where we should take a step back and start thinking about what are the things that should be done differently. And Syria is a good example, or at least a good starting point for the UN structure to basically be reviewed in order to see or overcome all of the challenges and gaps we have witnessed there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Haid, for that contribution. And actually building on from that, I will move to Tanya Gili-Kailani, who is obviously deeply embedded in the local region. And building on those points, I wonder how you relate international aid processes to the significant issues that you work with on the ground. What material issues is international aid here focused on, and is it satisfying the packet, as it were? Do you have, what are the gaps?
Thank you. And let me echo and start by thanking the organizers and allowing us to have this platform to speak about this. You know, if we're talking about Iraq is one of those countries that has been in conflict since its inception, really. And one of the issues has been, so whether we're talking about the different models that have happened here in Iraq, I think we've been through many of them, actually all of them. So for example, you know, during the embargo in the 90s, what we had was you had a regime that was actually despotic, that was actually using aid against its people. So that model, again, of using international aid to ensure that they're controlling the population, they are controlling who gets what, and people are penalized if they are not allowed to or they do not, as you said, bow to the regime. And we saw that because even though Iraq itself was under embargo, but it also put the Kurdistan region under another embargo as well. So whatever was scarce in Iraq was even more scarce in the Kurdistan region. So there is that one model. The other model was obviously after 2003, where we actually had a full-fledged change in the country, and then you had basically a new state was born, and you had many countries, many entities contributed to the rebuilding of the country after conflict. So if we look at the numbers, it was like about $290 billion that were spent on rebuilding the country after 2003. And then if we look at it, let's say if we go 2003 up until 2014. So up until that time, there was, again, that model of international aid and the rebuilding after conflict. And then we come to the third stage where after Daesh happened, or ISIS, and then there was major destruction in some parts of the country, but then the perpetrators here were not the state. So, or they were not, it was an, even though they were Iraqis mostly, but they still were outsiders. So the state was actually part of supposedly the solution to overcome Daesh. So in that stage, so you had, again, those numbers were quite high. I think it was like 2.9 billion was given in aid in order for the reconstruction and for the humanitarian support and so on. But then, of course, these numbers dwindled. And then, so these three different models, each one came with its own challenges. And, and what, basically what Haidt spoke about, what Lahib spoke about, I think we've kind of have seen all of these things. But if we talk about Iraq today, and if we look at what can be learned from all these different models, I think we definitely are a prime example. And I really do echo my colleague here when he said that the way the humanitarian aid is distributed, whether, you talked about just about the UN system, but then if we look at it internationally in general, it really is flawed. The reason being is that, you cannot have a cookie cutter model that applies to every single situation, to every single scenario, to every single area. And, there's a lot of similarities because we're talking about Palestine, we're talking about Syria, and we're talking about Iraq, so it's kind of the same thing. I'm not even gonna touch the African continent, but what we have seen here is that that same model that kind of came from outside and that was applied in the 90s, and then maybe with some little change, it was applied post-2003, and then with a little bit more change, it was applied post-2014, but it still yet has not done what it's supposed to do. Because when we're talking about international aid, what is the point of international aid? Yes, you are trying to stop or trying to ensure that people are actually getting what they need, or the civilians, they are, whether it's their basic needs, they are, their protection, all of these things that we're, that are, let's say, their daily needs, right? But then at the same time, when the conflicts continue to happen, you really haven't done anything. And people and these countries and these states and these refugees and the displaced and even the host community, they may just look at these international aids basically as a handout that would be expected. So if, again, going back to Iraq, is that, it got to a point where Iraq is a rich country, right? We have resources. Since yesterday, there's been a lot of talk about, we need better planning. We talk about diversification. Obviously, the government pulling out of the private sector and giving more room to them in order for them to be able to hire young people and things like that. But then, we're a local organization, a Seed Foundation, and we mainly operate in the Kurdistan region. But one of the things that the other challenges that we had seen, and we think that it really can be done so much better when it comes to international aid, is that the localization process. So if we continue to wait and and just expect international aid that is just applied by these big organizations that come with these great, huge overhead costs, they come into the country, they basically work with the local organizations literally just as implementers and not building their capacity and not ensuring that they can go ahead and be, direct recipients and being part of the solution, right? So all these decisions are being made in these capitals around the world, when it comes to humanitarian aid, and, some international NGOs deciding this is what this little village in X, Y, or Z requires. And I think that in the panel before, when somebody spoke about and said, we have the World Banks and we have the IMFs and so on, talking about what we need and what is required for us, I think this is where we find that that gap is still there, and it's not something that has been worked on very well. So in Iraq, post-2014 or post-ISIS, what we had is we had the humanitarian response plan, and that actually added quite a bit in terms of the reconstruction, the humanitarian aid, and things like that. But then none of all that money that was spent, none of it actually tried to deal with the root cause of the problems. Because in a country like Iraq, as I said, we've had conflict since our inception. So what's going to happen is if I do not resolve the issues, they'll continue to come up. In many other conferences, we always say, Daesh has not ended. There's going to be Daesh 2.0 and all these other things. But then the question is why? Because we have yet to deal of the reasons why these conflicts exist in the first place, right? So I'm not going to take much more time on this, but I think that if we talk about the process by which humanitarian aid actually is delivered to conflict areas, it's very important, to work with the actual local organizations and strengthening their capacity in order for them to be able to be part of that solution and not just telling them what to do and where to do it and how to do it, and also learning from the different or past experiences and ensuring that whatever model we work on, it actually is contextualized to the conflict itself and not trying to bring the Ukraine model to apply it in Gaza or take the Gaza model and try and apply it in Sudan and so on. That just doesn't work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think this makes a good moment then to turn to the international actor perspective and Your Excellency, Mr. Saylor. I wonder if you, as the representative of the European Union, could comment on what the key principles are that are shaping the EU's approach to aid in Iraq and what you would change.
Do I have to press this? Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to the American University, to the organizers here. Thank you for you being here, auditorium. It's great to have you here. I feel delighted to explain a little bit the EU's aid system in Iraq. But before I go to this, let me make a more principal remark. And I followed you very much in Gaza because I used to work on Gaza myself 10 years back. Can you imagine we had once a project that we built an airport in Khan Yunis? Just as a reminder, there were other times. In the setup of international aid, we normally have you were talking about models, we have normally a very strict sequence of approaches. We start with end of crisis approach, humanitarian aid, massively. Then with help to build up security structures. And that leads to peace building and then finally to the classical development aid. We call this in theory the triple nexus. It's a very theoretical term. What we have learned the last 10 years across the world where we spend money is that all these templates, models are good, but we have to use them on a case-by-case basis. Gaza is totally different. It's still it's a conflict situation. In Afghanistan, for example, we had simply to make the decision, was not really a heavy decision, do we continue humanitarian aid and development aid or only humanitarian aid? You know very well that we are not granting development aid to the Taliban. It's a highly political decision, but it is different from other situations. So that as an intro, perhaps, to explain also the thinking we have in Brussels and in Luxembourg and Strasbourg when it comes to the parliament, how we think about the aid, where is the impact of the aid. Regarding Iraq, for us, yes, on paper, this is a post-conflict country, on paper. And I like very much this op-ed that Prime Minister al-Sudani published before he went to DC, where in one page, in one moment, he's talking about the problems of Iraq's internal complexities. I like very much this term, because this is, again, the case-by-case basis. This is what makes aid for Iraq difficult. We, as EU, we still have some humanitarian aid here, internally displaced people. I hope we will not need more humanitarian aid because of climate effects. But we have shifted completely away from this to development aid. And I personally think we should even stop development aid. You said very much, as a rich country, why do we need to pay currently 400 million euros to Iraq when the money is here? On the other hand, you know, you can also play with money. It's, we have the famous say that the EU has always been called to be a payer but not a player. I think we are changing this at the moment a little bit. So when it comes to Iraq, we still have classical development projects. Yes, this is the case. For example, when it comes to certain community aid in provinces. But we are changing the whole approach, and that's what we want to do in the coming years, to a much more, I would call it, modern system. We want to work with economy, with banks, in order to foster the own sources that are there in Iraq, and to build up, private sector development is our key issue. And we are very glad also that we have a good donor coordination with the UN, with the US, with others, in assuring that we do not double and triple the aid that is there. But the aid we are planning for Iraq in the next years is not anymore, I would say, a classical development aid. Let me give you an example. EBRD, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Iraq is now a member since a few months. The bank will come here in the beginning of next year. We are in good discussions with them. The bank has clearly plans to foster private sector development. How? By granting loans to the banks, or even directly to young entrepreneurs, to young people particularly who want to build up a company. That can be even a hairdresser shop, or IT, or whatever is at hand. It can also be a loan that is granted via a bank. This has the advantage that the Iraqi banks learn better how to deal with the international finance system, and they will have to deal with the international finance system, whether they like it or not. It's to be done. On the other hand, we also continue with our classical aid when it comes to capacity building. We work very much with the government as regards the accession of Iraq to the WTO. It's a very complex system. We have seen this in the 90s when we had the big enlargement of the European Union with the countries in the East. It was a heavy process for all these countries because you have all the rules and regulations and standards of the WTO that you have to take over credibly and to implement. Yeah. So the other example when it comes to our banks is European Investment Bank. And while EBRD is more on the private sector development, EIB, once here, can very much be a valid player in infrastructure measures. They have a huge competence collected inside Europe, but also in some countries outside. They're even operational now in Uzbekistan. And we look very much forward, and we are in good contacts with the Ministry of Finance. So in summary, we want to, let's call it, modernize our aid. I would not consider Iraq anymore a post-conflict country in the classical term. It's a country that needs reforms. It's a heavy work, but the things to be done are not anymore the classical post-conflict issues. Yes, stability is still a bit shaky and volatile here and there. At the moment, it's better than it was 3-4 months ago. You have to keep an eye on this, but in principle, we want to go ahead. We want to go ahead with modern finance instruments and also involve the economy, not only EU to the state. You were mentioning international institutions and the overheads. I was tempted to give you an example of overheads we pay, but then you will fall from the chair. And therefore, I'm not going to do this. No, but it is on the other hand also necessary that it has been necessary so far. It has been necessary so far to work with international organizations and to pay the overheads. Yeah, it's like that. But again, we want to go away from this and we want to continue developing a new model, a new approach. I know that many stakeholders in the country are ready to this, for this, and we look forward to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I think now is the perfect time to hear from the United Nations perspective as well. So, Mr. Isaksai, as the Special Representative of the Secretary General here in Iraq and leading the UNAMI program, I wonder if you could reflect on what UNAMI has taught us about how we can deliver these kinds of programs here and elsewhere. What are the greatest successes and potential failures of the UNAMI initiative?
Thank you, and also I want to thank the university for this opportunity. If you allow me, I want to just add a point of clarification. When we talk about UNAMI, it's a political entity set up by the Security Council mandate, but a lot of the humanitarian and development work is delivered by 24 other United Nations agencies. So I will not be really speaking much about UNAMI's political work, which is a very different kettle of fish, I would say. But of course, as Thomas mentioned, we work in a very triple nix function, where you have the political, the humanitarian, and the development working, or should be working together, really to find solutions to Iraq. I would like to actually start my discussion on the broader humanitarian situation and then come to Iraq. Just because if you look at the statistic, it's really staggering that in the last 10 years, that the humanitarian situation have gotten actually worse. If we, and there's more and more pressure on the international organization, on the UN in particular, to really deliver humanitarian services. And of course, I wouldn't discount our local partners and donors. Just to give you some figures, in 2014, there were 76 million people dependent on humanitarian aid in 24 countries. Today, 10 years later, we have 184 million people in 73 countries dependent on humanitarian aid. That's a huge increase and puts a lot of stress on the humanitarian community to deliver services and to save lives and to basically protect civilians. And this is in comparison to, in terms of, also if you look at it in dollar figure, this year the global humanitarian overview was $46 billion compared to $19 billion again almost 10 years ago. And compare that with $2.2 trillion that was spent on defense budget. $2.2 trillion was spent on defense in comparison to $46 billion that is now requested to feed and support 184 million. I just wanted to give you this food for thought and put all of this in the context. Now coming to Iraq. In Iraq, of course, 2003 was a watershed moment, not only for Iraqis, but also for the UN. As you know, the Canal Hotel bombing, where the United Nations lost 22 of its staff, was a watershed in a sense that it actually turned the debate on humanitarianism from one being respected to one being targeted. So since then, the humanitarian community has been really targeted either by states or non-state actors. Last year alone, we had over 400 violence reported against humanitarian workers. And out of that, 134 were actually killed. Now, I'm not sure if that figure includes what's happening in Gaza today. So we see enormous disrespect for international humanitarian law, international humanitarian principles, and state and non-state actors are violating it. And therefore, for us really to move from this situation, we have to really advocate and go back to countries respecting international humanitarian law and international humanitarian principles. So that's where I wanted to give you a little bit of the context. Now, in Iraq, as I said, that 2003 was a watershed moment because that's when also the General Assembly moved a few years later to establish the International Humanitarian Day or the World Humanitarian Day. And ever since, of course, the United Nations has been very active in Iraq's reconstruction and also rebuilding. Our work actually accelerated in 2014 after the crisis of Daesh. And I would actually see a little bit the glass half full. I know you've put some of the challenges that's confronting, and I'll come back to that because there are some actually relevant points you're making. But if we look at overall, in terms of the positive that Iraq has really witnessed, is that in 2017, we had around 11 million displaced Iraqis. Now that figure has come down to less than 1 million. And during that period, of course, around $5.5 billion was channeled through the what we call it humanitarian response plan, and thanks to our donors and also partners. And in these, I would say 8 years or plus, we've seen a lot of work that was supported by the United Nations humanitarian agencies and also our partners, whether they were locals or internationals. We've built more than 4,000 or 5,000 infrastructure projects in the 5 conflict-affected governorates, most of it, of course, in Nineveh, Anbar, and also Salahuddin, Diyala, and Kirkuk. Just to give you one example, the Mosul University became a wasteland when it was at one point hosting 30,000 students. Our support enabled it now for Mosul now to be again a very thriving and successful university. In Sinjar, we have reconstructed and rehabilitated over 5,000 shelters, 52 schools, hospitals, and so forth. Now, just to come back to Ambassador Thomas and also our other panelists, is humanitarian aid and development aid is not the solution. I think where we have to emphasize, in my view, is national ownership, whether that national ownership rests with the government or with the local NGOs and civil society organizations. And that's what we are trying to move towards. Our next 5-year cooperation framework that we are working on for the next 5 years, starting 2025, is really a paradigm shift. We're going to move from this aid dependency to more technical assistance. Because if you look at it really, the UN, yes, we have humanitarian agencies, but our role and comparative advantage is really technical assistance. We bring the normative agenda. We would like to bring advisory support, technical assistance, knowledge, best practices, and to make sure that countries like Iraq also meet its international obligations and commitments, whether it's the Sustainable Development Goals, Paris Agreement on climate change, and many more. And for us to help Iraq to also improve its ranking, whether it's in doing business or Transparency International Index on corruption, and many more. So I think my frustration always is when I engage with the government, they still see the UN as a donor. And we are actually not a donor. We have donors like EU, we have Italy, and many more. But I think our role comes more in providing technical assistance, enabling state building, capacity building, enabling countries to withstand on its own feet in the long run. Let me leave it there.
Thank you very much. And in the short time we have left, we have a number of questions from the audience, which I'm keen to try and consolidate. So back to Lahib, we have a question from the audience asking about the effects of what's happening in Gaza on Iraq and whether or not there may be any response that's required from that perspective.
The effect on Iraq?
Any effects on Iraq from the current issues taking place in Gaza?
So I assume that is relating to the regional tensions and not specifically on the humanitarian. Okay. Yes, of course, it has had an impact on Iraq, as we've seen. For about 15 months, there was a truce between the resistance groups and the U.S. presence that we've had here, where we've seen tensions flaring up in the past. With Gaza, I think that it was quite obvious that this axis of resistance was activated first in solidarity with what was happening there, but also in support of a part of that axis, Hamas. In Iraq, what effect did that have? Well, we were quite concerned for a while in terms of to what degree can this escalation get Iraq back into a place of internal instability. After some 160 attacks, or more than that, on U.S. assets, we hit a ceiling, I would say, in terms of how far this escalation could go in Iraq. And that happened after Tower 22 in Jordan, where 3 U.S. servicemen were killed. And I think at that point, all the actors involved in this, whether we're talking about Iran or the U.S. Or the Iraqi government, there was a realization that up until here, and no further escalation, because that could have serious repercussions on a country that has just come out of decades of internal instability. Will that hold? I don't know. Whether we see an Israeli military intervention into Rafah, that could kind of spark this type of impact on Iraq again. But so far, it seems like the main players here are on the same page, that we can't have that deep impact in a country like Iraq. Hopefully it holds, but it remains to be seen.
Thank you, Lahib. And in the very short time we have left, we have a number of questions focused on the EU and its contribution. So I wonder if you could very briefly just comment on the role of the donor side and think particularly on how organisations such as the EU can support good governance in their assistance.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, many people still also in Iraq, but not only in Iraq, think, and Ghulam said, we are the donors. We give money and then automatically the transformation processes happen. In general, we have to make clear that not only the government and civil society organizations want the transformation. You, the people, must want the transformation. You must agree that corruption is fought on. You must agree that essential reforms are done. You must agree that regulatory authorities in electricity, in water management, in gas management, in the aviation sector, that this is built up. This is a change of your country, and many of you are probably not even aware of what this means. It is a rebuilding of an entire structure of an entire country. That's what we want to do. We have programs together with the UN on anti-corruption. We want to do something new, which is perhaps not so much at the forefront. We're building up now a kind of a program to fight drug and drug trafficking. The Minister of Interior told me the drug trafficking in Iraq is becoming Daesh 2.0. Listen to this. We want to integrate this as a cross-cutting issue in all our programs. But again, together with the government, together with the society, we want to have it also in education, in curricula. This is our proposal. We can only propose. We are not here to impose, to dictate, and to prescribe. But we lobby very strongly. I have clearly the feeling that not only the government wants this. When I talk to individual people, many people want the change in the country because they simply tell me we want to have a normal family where the kids can go to school, to universities, they can travel outside the country, that we are recognized as a normal state within the international community. There are many technical details I do not want to go now to, but essentially, again, for me, is, and we do it with the member states, by the way, I would not wish to forget this, essential is really the acceptance and the willingness of this deep change of a whole society and the whole country and the economy. I repeat this, you may not be aware what this means. We have seen it with our enlargement when we modified basically 10 countries in 20 years. It was only possible because the citizens went with us, and the political parties, and all the others. But the citizens also wanted it. And again, you may be need to get used that you get an invoice for your water consumption, and that there is an incentive that you consume less water, and then the water problem becomes less a problem. But the management of the system is not there or is not appropriate. So we have a call from the government to help. We are happy to take this on. And we come in, as Ghulam also said, with TA, with technical assistance. But all that, I repeat it for the second time, it's working only if acceptance in the broad society and also in the economy is there.
Thank you. Tanya Kiligalani, can I ask you, from your experience working both in governmental and non-governmental sectors, how can the non-governmental sector most effectively leverage its voice to inform debates and the dialogue around the delivery of aid where it matters most?
Wow. You have 3 hours to talk about this? No. If we really want to make sure that people are heard, I mean, obviously, the conversation must continue. And I think one of the things that we are seeing, unfortunately, is the space for the non-governmental organizations is tightening in Iraq, whether we're talking about the Kurdistan region or whether we're talking about the rest of the country. This is, yes, as you said, Mr. Ambassador, the people must speak. They must have, raise their voice, but it happens through channels like non-governmental organizations, other entities and so on, through their legislature, through, their representatives, etc. But at the same time, I think it's very important to make sure that these channels are open. I mean, we are one of those countries now, I think just in Kurdistan alone, we have like 31 satellite channels, 124 local channels, plus I don't know how many newspapers and websites, etc. And now also we have this whole citizen journalism where, everybody can open up a Facebook or any of those social media platforms to speak up and make their voice heard. But I think if we want to talk about getting the message out, I think it's important for the organizations and for the international community as well, is to talk to the people. Right? So you're talking about designing a program, Mr. Ambassador, for the EU. I think it's important to really kind of get the buy-in to ensure that you do have these focus groups. You are talking to more than just the Ministry of Interior. You are talking more than the head of this department on that department. Of course, they have a lot to say, but at the same time, I think a lot of the people of Iraq, they feel a disconnect between them and the country, and the state. And even though I am in the non-organizational stuff anymore, and I said I'd never talk about politics again, but I think that the politicians, they have not been able to reach the ground and to speak to the grassroots and really be able to translate what the people want. Because at the end of the day, as it was mentioned here, what do people want really? They want security, they want safety, they want services for their people, they want for their families, and they want to be able to drink clean water, breathe clean air, and have good schools and for their kids to go to, and not just these mud huts or these blocks that kids are sitting on, unfortunately, in a rich country like Iraq. So in order for us to be able to keep that channel or that dialogue open, I think it's important for the citizens as well. Election after election, we're seeing that the number of participation is going down. You can make a change with your vote. You can make a change when you participate in the elections, when ensuring that you are talking to your representatives, and you are ensuring that you are being heard, and don't be afraid. I think that's the best thing that we can do. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you for that. Another question from the audience. We've heard a lot about specific conflicts, both in the area and obviously there's conflicts all around the globe. So what role can the United Nations specifically take, and how can it leverage its immense architecture to address both current crises, ongoing crises, protracted issues, to ensure transparency, good governance, and stabilization where it's needed?
Thank you.
It's a big question, but...
And the United Nations has the solution for all of them.
Obviously.
Well, I actually wanted to respond by talking a little bit about, I don't know how much the audience knows about the Summit of the Future. The UN Secretary General will be convening in 2024 the Summit of the Future, and the aim of the summit is exactly to respond to some of the crises that is confronting our world. It's not just conflict and wars, but also we have what we call it the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. And of course, COVID and others multiplied some of the humanitarian issues. But I think in the bigger sense of things, the whole multilateralism is under attack and is being weakening. So the Summit of the Future is being convened really to increase or strengthen international cooperation on how to agree on to respond to crisis in a more collective and collaborative way, to come up with arrangement of collective securities, to strengthen regional initiatives and regional, basically, peacekeeping and peace strengthening approaches, where we see this also in Africa right now with the African Union, what we call it also peace enforcement as well. And also to accelerate the Sustainable Development Goal. As you know, we are just 7 years, or 6 years actually, I have to say now, away from the 2030. And only in our own assessment, 30% of the countries would be able to meet some of the SDGs. And of course, in that category is also Iraq is falling behind on many SDGs. So how do we accelerate SDG? We also want to, I think one of the other issue that's very much high on the Secretary General's agenda is how to transform and reform the whole global financial architecture, which was actually created after World War II, but it's not really responding to the new realities. We see more and more countries under debt, and they're not able to service their debt, so how do we also allow countries to have low-cost sovereign borrowing, and also debt restructuring and so forth. So that's another, but the most important element of the Summit of the Future will be a new agenda for peace.
Well, I think that's probably an optimistic way to draw this panel to a close, with an optimistic agenda for the future. Thank you once again to all of the speakers who have joined us today. Thank you to the audience for your questions, and please join me in a round of applause.
Distinguished guests, please remain in your seats. The upcoming panel will begin momentarily. مرحبا. Distinguished guests, please remain in your seat. The session will begin momentarily. I would also like to ask the speakers of this panel to come join us at the stage. Distinguished guests, please find your seats. The session will commence momentarily. Ladies and gentlemen, the upcoming panel is entitled The Future of Iraq's Political System. It is moderated by Zamkan Ali Salim, a senior research fellow at the Institute of Regional and International Studies at AUIS, who will lead the panel.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this panel on the future of Iraq's political system. Some of the panels yesterday looked at how Iraq's politics, security, and stability were shaped by regional dynamics. Today, we're going to bracket the regional factor and look at Iraq's political system from the lens of democracy. Experts of comparative politics tell us that political systems cannot claim democracy just by holding elections. Most authoritarian states hold regular elections in order to legitimize themselves, co-opt and weaken opposition groups, distribute and redistribute resources and positions among the members of the ruling elite. A genuine democracy is about the rule of law. A genuine democracy is about having a space where freedom of expression is safeguarded. In Iraq, there have been reports by civil society activists, human rights organizations on limitations imposed on civil society activism by the political system. On the other hand, there are growing uncertainty on the viability and validity of the federal system. We'll discuss these questions with an excellent group of experts today who I'm very delighted to introduce. First, we have Zaid Al-Ali. Zaid is an expert on constitutionalism in the Arab world. He's also a senior program manager at International IDEA. We also have Noor Saad. She's the head of SASA organization, a democracy promotion organization that seeks to promote youth political participation. We also have Mohammed Alwiya. Mohammed is a director of Ashdar Center for Democracy Support and is based in Najaf. Last but not the least, we have Mohammed Rauf. He's editor-in-chief of Rudao Media Organization that extensively covers politics and economy of Iraqi Kurdistan. Thank you very much. Welcome again, all of you. I would like to start with Noor. Noor, can you please share some of the ideas about the challenges that you and your colleague face in Baghdad when you try to promote democracy, try to conduct political reform within the system?
في بداية الأمر أوجه الشكر الخاص لمعهد آيرس على إتاحة هذه الفرصة وكذلك للزملاء والسادة الحضور. في بداية الأمر كمشاركة سياسية للشباب هي بدأت منذ بدء احتجاجات تشرين في عام 2019. الفكرة الأساسية هي من المشاركة السياسية للشباب أن يكون أكو تضمين شامل للشباب في العمل السياسي والعمل التشريعي، قد يكون العمل التنفيذي أهم أيضاً في هذا الخصوص. اليوم التظاهرات اللي صارت أخيراً في تشرين هي كان الغرض منها هو إصلاح النظام السياسي وإعادة ثقة المواطن بالدولة بشكل خاص وتوحيد الآراء والأفكار ما بين المواطنين والنظام السياسي. بصورة خاصة أن الشباب يرغبون للدخول للعملية السياسية هو لغرض إزاحة الهيمنة من السلطة السياسية، أن يكون أكو مشاركة فاعلة لكل الأطراف، ويكون أكو احتكار للمنظومة السياسية من قبل جيل محدد. اليوم كشباب لا يؤمنون بالإزاحة الجيلية نهائياً. الشباب الفاعلين بالمجال السياسي هو يؤمن بالمشاركة الشاملة لكل الأفراد ومختلف الأجيال لتحقيق الديمقراطية السليمة في النظام السياسي العراقي. اليوم النظام السياسي العراقي قد يعاني من الكثير من الثغرات، يعاني الكثير من المشاكل ومنها المشاركة الواسعة للأفراد. احنا لا يوجد لدينا مشاركة واسعة للأفراد. الطبقة السياسية قد تكون هي محتكرة لجيل معين دون غيره، وجود تمثيل نسوي ولكن تمثيل مهمش. لهذا احنا نسعى لتوزيع السلطة ما بين مختلف أفراد المجتمع. إضافة إلى ذلك أنه إحنا نحاول إلى إعادة الثقة والحوار ما بين الحكومة والمواطن، وهذا إحنا ما نعمل عليه في معهد ساسة، أن يكون أكو حوار مشترك ما بين المواطنين وما بين صناع القرار على شقيه التنفيذي والتشريعي لتحقيق الديمقراطية السليمة. ولكن في كل ظل هذه التحديات، في ظل كل هذه الممارسات، هناك تحديات جمة إحنا نواجهها كفاعلين وناشطين بهذا المجال. تحديات من جانب القانوني، تحديات من جانب الممارسة، تحديات من جانب الأمن. اليوم كمؤسسات مدنية وكمؤسسات تعنى بقضايا الديمقراطية تعاني من الكثير من التحديات. تحاول حالياً السلطة إلى حد ما إلى تقويض عمل هذه المؤسسات المدنية من ناحية الممارسات والأساليب اللي هي حالياً تفرضها على مشاركتهم كفاعلين داخل النظام السياسي وكذلك فاعلين داخل المجتمع العراقي. إضافة إلى ذلك أنه هي تحاول إلى خلق وصياغة قوانين وتشريعات تعزز هذه الممارسات بشكل يقوض فاعليتها وإصلاحها النظام. بالرغم هي لا تحاول أنه هي تسحب السلطة من جانب تسحب التأثير من جانب السلطة بقدر ما هي تحاول إلى إصلاح النظام السياسي. إضافة إلى ذلك اليوم إحنا نعاني من الكثير من التحديات على عاتق جانب حرية التعبير. اليوم حرية التعبير في النظام السياسي العراقي قد تكون مقيدة إلى حد كبير تؤثر على كل الفاعلين وكذلك المواطن العادي. اليوم كحرية التعبير هي مقيدة بشكل كبير. اليوم أي مواطن عراقي يحاول بإدلاء رأيه إن كان في جميع القضايا، إن كانت بيئة أو اقتصاد أو إدارة الدولة لجانب معين، أنه هي تحاول إلى ردع هذه الأصوات، ليس إنه فقط لغرض إنه تحاول الحفاظ على النظام، ولكن أنه هي تبقي هذا الواقع على ما هو عليه، لا تحاول إلى إصلاح السياسي. مع ذلك نحن نحاول في ظل كل هذا إلى بناء شراكات مشتركة ما بين المؤسسات المدنية وما بين المواطن وما بين الناشطين لخلق ديمقراطية أكثر عدالة، لخلق نظام ديمقراطي صحيح يؤمن بالمشاركة، وخلق نظام ديمقراطي يشارك فيه جميع الأفراد بغض النظر عن انتمائهم وعمرهم وتوجههم السياسي والأيديولوجي. اليوم نحن كشباب نؤمن بالمشاركة السياسية الفاعلة لكل الأحزاب السياسية، قد تكون توجهها ليبرالي، قد يكون توجهها إسلامي، لغرض إصلاح النظام ولا نرجع إلى الماضي ما كان في النظام السابق، أنه أكو أفكار معينة تحكم البلد، أكو فئة عمرية تحكم البلد بأفكارها وتوجهاتها. إحنا لا نؤمن بهذه القضية، إحنا نؤمن بمشاركة واسعة، نؤمن بنظام ديمقراطي عادل، وهذا إحنا ما نفتقر إليه ما بعد 20 سنة من التحول الديمقراطي اللي عاشه العراق. شكرا.
Thank you, Noor. If I move to Mohammed Alawiya. Mohammed, do you share the same ideas that about the limitations that you're facing operating from Najaf?
شكرا جزيلا. بداية نشكر فخامة الدكتور برهم صالح على رعايته لهذا الملتقى، هذا التجمع السنوي المهم على مستوى العراق والمنطقة في الشرق الأوسط. كما نشكر معهد الدراسات الإقليمية والدولية آيرس على تنظيم وإدارة مثل هكذا ملتقى ومؤتمر ضخم. بطبيعة الحال هنالك تحديات تواجهها المؤسسات المدنية بالعموم وتفرعاتها من منظمات مجتمع مدني، مراكز تفكير وأبحاث، من يعني مجاميع شبابية، تحديات تواجهها في مواجهة النظام السياسي. أنا أعتقد هذه التحديات صارت بسبب مشاركة أغلب المؤسسات المدنية الشبابية في احتجاجات تشرين. احتجاجات تشرين كانت طابعها شبابي، والمتطوعين والمنتمين للمؤسسات المدنية الشبابية غالبيتهم هم شباب يعني، فشاركوا باحتجاجات تشرين. فصار عند صانع القرار السياسي خلط ما بين أن تكون أنت معارض سياسي، أو ما بين أن تكون أنت مجتمع مدني أو مؤسسة مدنية هدفها تقويم النظام السياسي. هنالك فرق ما بين المعارضة السياسية كأحزاب وما بين المجتمع المدني كمؤسسات مدنية. هذه الجزئية اللي تحتاج إلى تسليط الضوء عليها. أنا أعتقد المؤسسات المدنية لها دورين رئيسيين محوريين. الدور الأول هو تصويب عملية صنع القرار السياسي من خلال الضغط على صانع القرار بالأدوات والوسائل المتاحة. الدور الثاني هو أيضا المساهمة في تصويب اتجاهات الرأي العام من خلال يعني زيادة الوعي المجتمعي ثقافيا، سياسيا، اقتصاديا، اجتماعيا. هاي الأدوار بالضرورة هي أدوار مكملة لعملية بناء النظام وترصين أساسات النظام، وليست مخربة وليست معادية للنظام. صانع القرار السياسي عليه أن يفهم أن هذه المؤسسات هي دورها تكميلي ودورها مهم، هي حلقة وصل ما بين صانع القرار وما بين المجتمع، حلقة وصل ما بين صانع القرار وما بين العالم، لأن هاي أغلب المؤسسات عندها شراكات مع منظمات دولية مهمة، مع مؤسسات خارجية تنقل تجارب كثيرة، وحتى اقتصاديا إذا نريد نحسبها اقتصاديا يعني تصير هي مصدر مال إنكم، دخل إلى البلد. فالفكرة أنه صانع القرار يحتاج يتفهم المنتاليتي مال الشباب، يتفهم كيفية التعاطي مع الشباب، وأيضا يحتاج أنه يطور أدواته في التعامل مع المجتمع المدني بالعموم. وأكتفي بهذا القدر. شكرا.
Thank you, Mohammed. Move to Kag Mohammed Rauf. Kag Mohammed, elections in Iraqi Kurdistan is scheduled for June, but now it's under question because one of the major parties is refusing to participate. But there are people who say in this region, even if we have elections, we will, at the end of the day, end up with the same PUK-KDP duopoly. Now I have to be very careful not to discourage people to participate if the elections happened. But that will have implications for democracy in this region. Why is it the case that the PUK and the KDP are likely to win again and control the system again?
زۆر سپاس. حتما من وەک ڕۆژنامەنووسێ لێرە قساکەم ڕەنبێ کەمتر مراعاتی لایەنی دیبلۆماسی کەم و حەزەکەم زۆر سەراحەت و بە بێڕ و توش قسە بکەم بە تایبەت لەسەر پرسی هەڵبژاردن لە هەرێمی کوردستان و ئەوەی کە هەیە. بێگومان هەڵبژاردن لە هەرێمی کوردستان نەهۆکاری بەرەو پێشبردننی دیموکراسیە لە هەرێمی کوردستان، نەهۆکاری ئاڵوگۆڕکردنی دەسەڵات و حکمڕانیە لە هەرێمی کوردستان. ئەوەی هەیە هەڵبژاردن بە میزاج یاخود بە ئارەزووی حیزبە باڵەدەستەکانی هەرێمی کوردستانە، واتە ئەوەی هەڵبژاردن یەکلاکاتەوە دەنگی دەنگدەران نییە، بەڵکو ویست و خواستی حیزبەکانە و بە تایبەتیش ئەوەی کاریگەری لەسەر یەکلاکردنەوەی هەڵبژاردنە هێز و پارە و دەسەڵات و تەنانەت لایەنی ئەقلیمیە. ئێستا پارتی دیموکراتی کوردستان ئامادەی هەڵبژاردن نییە لەبەرەوەی دۆخی سیاسی و پێگەی سیاسی هەم لە ئاستی بەقا و هەم لە ئاستی هەرێمی کوردستان لەو ئاسەدا نییە، بۆیە ئامادەی هەڵبژاردن نییە. پێشتر ساڵی ڕابردوو یەکێتی نیشتیمانی کوردستان ئامادەی هەڵبژاردن نەبوو لەبەرەوەی دۆخی ناوخۆیی خراپ بوو. لەبەرەوە هەڵبژاردن ئەوەی لە هەرێمی کوردستان هەڵبژاردن یەکلایەکاتەوە هێز و پارە و سوڵتەیە. لەبەرەوەی هەرێمی کوردستان هەمومان دەزانین دابەش بووە بەسەر دوو زۆنی تایبەتدا. ئەم دوو زۆنە هەر یەکە و هێزی تایبەتی خۆی هەیە، پارە و دەسەڵاتی تایبەتی خۆی هەیە. لەوەش مەترسیدارتر هەر یەکە و دابەش بوون بەسەر دوو هێزی دوو وڵاتی ئەقلیمیە. پارتی دیموکراتی کوردستان لەژێر هەیمەنە و لەژێر با بڵێن پاشکۆی وڵاتی تورکیایە، یەکێتی نیشتیمانی کوردستان لەژێر هەیمەنە و لەژێر ئاراستە و پاشکۆی ئێراندایە. ئەمانە کاریگەریان لەسەر پرۆسی هەڵبژاردن و ئەنجامی هەڵبژاردن هەیە لە هەرێمی کوردستان. ئەوەی هەڵبژاردن یەکلاکاتەوە بۆم هەڵبژاردنەوە و هەڵبژاردنەکانی ڕابردوو لەبەرەوەی لە هەرێمی کوردستان تا ئێستا 12 هەڵبژاردن کراوە، 5 هەڵبژاردننی پەرلەمانی کوردستان، 5 خولی پەرلەمانی عراق، 2 هەڵبژاردننی ئەنجومەنی پارێزگاکان، 2 نیوە هەڵبژاردننی شارەوانەکانیش کراوە. هێزی ئەمنی کە دابەش بوون بەسەر یەکێتی نیشتیمانی کوردستان و پارتی دیموکراتی کوردستانە زۆرترین کاریگەریان لەسەر یەکلاکردنەوەی هەڵبژاردن هەیە. بۆ نمونە لە لیستی موچەدا 433,000 کەس لە سلکی سەربازی موچە وەرەگرن. 433,000 کەس کۆی موچەکانیان 450 ملیارە دینارە. 450 ملیار دینار لە 148 کۆی موچەخۆرانی هەرێمی کوردستانە. ئەم 433,000 کەسە کە لە سلکی سەربازیان و لە 98 بۆ 99 دەنگەدەن، دەنگدان یەکلاکەنەوە لە هەرێمی کوردستان. 433,000 کەس بە 13,000 بۆ 15,000 بۆ بەهای کورسی حسابیکە نزیکەی 30 کورسیە. واتە هەر لە سەرەتاوە یەکێتی نیشتیمانی کوردستان و پارتی دیموکراتی کوردستان خاوەنی 12 بۆ 15 کورسین. کورسەکان واتە بناغەی کورسەکان یەکلاکرێتەوە. ئەو کاتە لە 100 کورسی پەرلەمانی کوردستان 70 کورسی، واتە ململانەکە لە نێوان هێزەکانی دیکە بە یەکێتی و پارتی وانەشەوە تقریباً 70 کورسیە. بەڵام هەڵبژاردن لە 92 هەتا ئێستا جۆرێک لە ناومێدی لای هاوڵاتیان دروست کردووە بە جۆرێک. لە دوایین هەڵبژاردننی پەرلەمانی عراقدا لە سێ پارێزگاکەی هەرێم 3,450,000 کەس مافی دەنگدانیان هەبووە، 2,270,000 کەس دەنگی نەداوە بە ڕێژەی لە 164. 1,233,000 کەس دەنگی داوە بە ڕێژەی لە 136. واتە زۆرترین کەس بەشداری نەکردووە. خەڵک ناومێد بووە لەوەی کە گۆڕانکاری بکرێت لە ڕێی سندوقەکانی دەنگدانەوە. لەو ڕێژەیە لە 3,450,000 کەس پارتی دیموکراتی کوردستان 579,000 دەنگی هێناوە بە ڕێژەی لە 170. لە 170 کۆی دەنگدەرانی هەرێمی کوردستان ئەوانی مافی دەنگدانیان هەیە لە 170 هێناوە. یەکێتی نیشتیمانی کوردستان 215,000 دەنگی هێناوە لە دوایین هەڵبژاردنە. لە 106 کۆی دەنگی دەنگدەرانی هەرێمی کوردستانی هێناوە. حکمڕانی ناوچەیەکەکە پارتی دیموکراتی کوردستان لە 170 هێناوە، حکمڕانی ناوچەیەکی دیکە دەکات. واتە ئەوەی هەڵبژاردن یەکلاکاتەوە دەنگی دەنگدەران نییە. و هەمیشە هەڵبژاردن لە 92 هەتا ئێستا هەمان حیزب و هەمان دەموچاو هەمان ئەوەی و بۆیە هەڵبژاردن هێزەکان لە هەرێمی کوردستان کە دابەش بوون بە چەند شێوەیەک کاریگەریان لەسەر هەڵبژاردن هەیە. لەلایەک هەڵبژاردن یەکلاکەنەوە، نزیکەی 30 کورسی ئەوان یەکلایەکەنەوە، لەلایەکی دیکە ئەم هێزانە هیچ ڕۆڵیشیان نییە لە پاراستنی هاوڵاتیانی هەرێمی کوردستان و سنوورەکانی هەرێمی کوردستان. هێزەکان لە هەرێمی کوردستان کە دابەش بوون بەسەر ئەم دوو پارتی دیموکراتی کوردستان و یەکێتی نیشتیمانی کوردستان تا ئێستا ڕێگریان لە درۆنیشی تورکی یاخود ساروخێکی ئێرانی نەکردو، تا ئێستا ڕێگریان لە پاسدارێک یاخود جەندەرمەیەکی تورکی نەکردووە بۆ هەرێمی کوردستان. ئەم هێزانە سەرەڕای ئەوە بەشێک لەم هێزانە بۆ سەرکوتکردنی ناڕەزایەکان بەکارەهێنرێن لە خۆپیشاندانەکانی هەرێمی کوردستان، لە خۆپیشاندانەکانی حەڤەی شوڕات 10 کەس شەهید بوون، لە خۆپیشاندانی 2021 لە سلێمانی 10 کەسی دیکە 10 گەنج شەهید بوون، لە خۆپیشاندانەکانی بادینان نزیکەی 100 کەس چالاکی مەدەنی دەستگیر کران و تا ئێستا شێروان شێروانی ئەوان لە زیندانن، بەشێک لە ڕۆژنامەنووسان تیرۆر کران، سۆران و سەردەشت و کاوەدات. خاڵێکی دیکە ئەوەی هەڵبژاردن یەکلاکاتەوە و پێگەی ئەم هێزە سیاسیانە قایمەکات مەسەلەی نەوتە لە هەرێمی کوردستان. نەوت ئەوەی دوێنێ وترا بۆتە بەڵایەک بۆ هاوڵاتیانی هەرێمی کوردستان. لە ساڵی 2014 تا 25 سی 2023 کە نەوت ڕاگیرە 2014 بۆری نەوتی هەرێمی کوردستان بڵێ نەوتی هەرێمی کوردستان بە بۆری ڕەوانەکرا، دایان قەیران ڕوبەڕووی هەرێمی کوردستان کردووە لە نەبوونی موچە، لە قەیرانی کۆمەڵایەتی سیاسی، کۆچ و کۆچبەران. لە 2014 تا ئەو کاتی نەوت ڕاگیرە 1 ملیار و 307 ملیۆن بەرمیل فرۆشراوە. کۆی داهاتەکەی 68 ملیار دۆلار بووە، 30 ملیار دۆلاری بۆ حکوومەت و 38 ملیار دۆلاری بۆ کۆمپانیاکان بووە. لە کاتێکدا لە هەرێمی کوردستان لەو کاتەوە هەرێمی کوردستان حکوومەتی هەرێمی کوردستان 34 ملیار دۆلار قەرزار بووە. لە 107 تریلیۆن دیناری پشکی هەرێمی کوردستان لە بەغدا تەنها 16 تریلیۆن هاتووە، 101 تریلیۆن دینار لە دەستدراوە، واتە بەهۆی نەوتەوە 34 ملیار دۆلار قەرزار بووە هەرێمی کوردستان، 101 تریلیۆن دیناریشی لە دەستداوە. یەکەم واتە هەرێمی کوردستان بەهۆی نەوتەکەیەوە کە پایەی هێزە باڵەدەستەکانی لە هەرێمی کوردستان قایم کردو و قایمتر کردو و دەوڵەمەندیانی کردو و بوونە خاوەنی دەیان دامەزراوە و کەناڵ و ئەوە و ئەمەش بەکارهێنرێ بۆ هەڵبژاردن بۆ بەشێکی بۆ سەرکوتکردنی دیموکراسی. بەشێک لەوە لە گەندەڵی نەوتایە. من یەک شتێکتان بۆ ئەجێڕمەوە بەڵام ئەتوێ لە گفتووەکەی ئەوە بکەم. حکوومەتی هەرێمی کوردستان هەموو ڕۆژێ 400,000 بەرمیل نەوتی فرۆشتووە. کۆی ئەو 10 ساڵی کە فرۆشتوێتی 1 ملیار و 307 ملیۆن بەرمیل بووە. ئەگەر حکوومەتی هەرێمی کوردستان ئێمە لە دامەزراوی درە و لێکدانەوەیەکمان کردووە، ئەگەر حکوومەتی هەرێمی کوردستان هەموو ڕۆژێک 400,000 بەرمیل نەوتی بکڕایە لە دەرەوە، 34 ملیار دۆلار قەرزار نابوو، 65 تریلیۆن دیناریش قازانجێ کرد و نەوتەکەشی وەکو خۆی مایەوە. کەواتە ئەم چی کردووە حکوومەتی هەرێمی کوردستان؟ و ئەگەر گەندەڵی تێدا نەبێ و ئەگەر بۆ مەسەلەی نەوت و بۆ مەسەلەی هەڵبژاردن و بۆ مەسەلەی بەیەسکردنی پایەکانی هێز و خۆی نەبێت، نەوت چ کاریگەریەکی هەبوو؟ ئەوەی کە ئێستا بینی قەیرانە هەمووی ئەوەیە.
Thank you very much, Kag Mohammed. Zaid, the federal court in Baghdad has recently passed a ruling that ended the quota system, the quota seats for minorities in Iraqi Kurdistan. Now, the party, the Kurdish party, the PUK, that filed the lawsuit did not expect that to happen. They were mostly expecting that the court will issue a ruling that will redistribute the quota seat across the system. So to many, the court's ruling not only presented Baghdad's encroachment into the internal affairs of Iraqi Kurdistan, but also was a blow to democracy by ending, by dealing a blow to the rights of the minorities. Is federalism over?
Okay. So, first of all, thanks to the chair for the session. Of course, thank you to President Saleh for his leadership and vision, and thanks to the university for organizing this terrific event, which really remains to this day the prime event in Iraq of this nature. So the answer to your question, I mean, there's various aspects to it. So the court itself, long-term Iraq watchers know, has gone through an evolution. There's basically been two courts since 2003. There's the court of Chief Justice Medhat Mahmoud and the current court. Medhat Mahmoud's vision or his perspective about these issues is that these are political questions and needed to be resolved politically. And any claim that was brought before the court that had a very deep political nature, I'm speaking generally, of course, there are exceptions, However, generally, he tried to defer to the fullest extent possible so as not to allow for the courts to be involved in these deep political questions, and therefore so as to avoid the court taking a position on political questions and therefore deciding who wins and who loses. And as soon as you have a loser on a political question, then people challenge the legitimacy of the court, which is of course what's happening currently. Now the current court sees things very differently. I mean, their perspective is that a claim has been brought, we should enter a decision, and they're rendering decisions that are very much in conformity with political ideology in the legal community in Baghdad, right? So, I mean, you have these different perspectives. They each have their advantage and their disadvantage. Of course, the Chief Justice Medhat Mahmoud was right that these are political questions. But the disadvantage, of course, is that you're deferring to the political class to work out these issues by themselves, but then they never do, right? So, for example, on the oil and gas question, you know, it's been 20 years now and we don't have oil and gas legislation, right? So you defer in the hope that this is a political question, must be resolved politically, but then it never does get resolved politically. Then on the other hand, you have this court that's issuing decisions, aggressive decisions, right? And leading to people openly challenging the legitimacy of the court, which is never a good thing in any system, especially in a place like Iraq. So I mean, that's one aspect that's really crucial and that really needs to be resolved. But on the general issue of federalism, so I wouldn't say that federalism is dead in Iraq. But what I would say is that federalism is a state of crisis. And I think it's important to go back to the basics, is that Iraq's constitution provides that the country is parliamentary and federal. Now, I very much believe that Iraq should be both parliamentary and federal. I very much believe that, and I'll fight that to my dying breath. There was a reference from the previous speaker, Noor, who spoke about a return to, a potential return to the previous system. One of the avenues to do that would be to establish a semi-presidential or a presidential system. That would be a definite death knell to constitutionalism in Iraq, would be a huge suicidal act, and I would oppose it to my final breath. On federalism specifically, once again, I fully support the idea that Iraq should be federal, but I don't believe that what we have in the constitution is a federal system, and I don't believe that there's political agreement in Iraq on what federalism is for, what it's supposed to achieve, how it should function, and not only is there not a political agreement today, but there's never been political agreement. Of course, the constitution was adopted through a referendum, and through a large majority. Everyone knows that. However, people will remember that immediately after the referendum, in February 2006 and in May 2006, Muqtada Sadr, Sayyid Muqtada Sadr, Nouri Maliki, Ibrahim Ja'fari, many political leaders in Baghdad immediately came out and said, we oppose federalism. Immediately at that time, right? And that's been the angle till today. Now, of course, there have been political actors in Baghdad who've been trying to stifle and block movements that the Kurdistan regional government have been trying to adopt over the past 20 years. It hasn't always been successful from Baghdad's perspective, but things are obviously changing. I mean, today, the situation, we don't need to go into it in detail. Some of it's already been evoked over the past two days, and I think people are broadly aware that circumstances today in 2024 are very different to what they were in 2005. I mean, broadly speaking, we have an ICC award that now determines that Baghdad is in control over the pipeline, and then also political clout in the country. The center of gravity has gravitated towards Baghdad. There's a huge amount of clout that Baghdad holds, and that Baghdad is now using the clout and the power and the authority that it has through the court and otherwise to impose new rules about how federalism should function. So and it's very uncomfortable, it's very unpleasant, and also very unfair, but that's not how political reform should be taking place. In any meaningful, progressive democracy, political reform happens through dialogue, through agreement, through consensus, right? And once again, I believe, my perspective, not everyone agrees, I agree with myself, of course, right, that we've never had consensus about these issues. Right? We have never had them. Now, if it was up to me, right, if it was up to me, and sadly it's not, but if it was up to me, right, I don't know, constitutions only live for certain periods of time, right? Professor Tom Ginsburg in Chicago worked out that in the whole history of the world, the average lifespan for a constitution is 19 years, right? Iraq's constitution has been in force now for 19 years, right? It's been 19 years exactly. I don't advocate for the replacement of the constitution. I think that the text should stay as it is. However, constitutional reform could take life through the adoption of the legislation that's missing. Now, in order to achieve that, the wrong approach would be for one political color, one political group, one political center of gravity to adopt the missing legislation. A better approach would be to engage in the type of dialogue that's always been missing in Iraq between the meaningful political forces, societal forces, civic forces in this country to agree what is federalism for? What is it designed to achieve? What are the building blocks for a federal system? Social solidarity, guarantees for the population, right? And then afterwards to give life to the mechanisms that are supposed to define, that give life to these fundamental building blocks. That discussion is yet to happen, and everyone should play a role in making sure that it does, including this university and everyone in this room, including ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zaid. Just a follow-up question for you, Noor. So you've said that you're taking a very peaceful approach to promoting democracy and rule of law in Iraq, with very powerful parties in control of economies, as Kag Mohammed said, and which applies to the rest of Iraq, in control of private security forces, access to means of violence. How do you do that? Do you have allies within the system? Because you mentioned even in the system is using parliament and the legislature to pass laws that restrict freedom of civil activism. Do you see any allies? Do you work with any allies, both in Iraq and within the international community? Do you receive any support?
نعم بالتأكيد، يعني من ناحية أنه كفاعلين بهذا المجال هناك شراكات ما بين الحكومة بصورة خاصة والبرلمان. يعني الكثير من المشاريع والقوانين تم العمل بها من قبل مؤسسات المجتمع المدني، وكذلك مراكز التفكير السياسي هي كانت بالشراكة مع المؤسسات الحكومية وبصورة خاصة مع البرلمان، وكذلك مع المؤسسات الدولية هي الداعم الأساس بهذا الخصوص. بس مع ذلك اليوم يعني احنا كفاعلين بهذا المجال نواجه تحديات في وصولنا للمؤسسات الحكومية. هناك بعض القرارات تم صدرها من قبل الحكومة أنه هي تمنع العمل مع المؤسسات المجتمع المدني بصورة خاصة، وهذا الأمر قد يحد من عملنا كفاعلين بهذا المجال. وإضافة إلى ذلك أنه راح يكون العمل المدني هو على الهامش في المستقبل، في حال إذا ما تبنى شراكات ما بين المؤسسات المدنية وما بين الحكومة، لأنه العمل المجال المدني هو عبارة عن مكمل للعمل الحكومي من ناحية التقييم والمتابعة، وإضافة إلى ذلك أنه هو يكون مكمل في بعض الجوانب اللي هي الحكومة تكون غير قادرة للوصول إليها، من ناحية المجتمع، من ناحية التأثير على الوعي المجتمعي وإلى آخره. لهذا من الضرورة أن هناك يكون شراكة مستدامة، ولا يكون هناك أي تحديات نواجهها مع الحكومة كفاعلين بهذا المجال، وإلا بقى الواقع على ما هو عليه كواقع للمؤسسات المدنية هو في تراجع.
Thank you. Muhammad Alwi, Noor mentioned the importance of coordination between different civil society activists and NGOs that work on promoting democracy across Iraq. Acting from Najaf, have you been trying to coordinate with NGOs in Baghdad and the rest of Iraq to enhance democracy in Iraq?
شكرا جزيلا. بداية احنا يعني كمركز عشتار دعم الديمقراطية مقرنا الرئيسي في النجف، لكن عندنا مقر آخر في بغداد، يعني مقر فرعي يعتبر. فأكيد احنا عملنا عديد من الشراكات المحلية والدولية، أيضا المحلية في النجف وفي بغداد. عملنا على حملات مدافعة تخص تعديل قوانين مهمة، عملنا على عملية يعني حملة تعديل قانون انتخابات مجالس المحافظات مع 7 منظمات شريكة. على مستوى العراق والرقعة الجغرافية موزعة على مستوى العراق، فبالتأكيد يعني هنالك شراكات مهمة. وإحنا نعتقد أيضا أنه بدون التشبيك والتنسيق والتكاتف ما بين المؤسسات المدنية، حتى وإن ظهرت بعض الاختلافات، لكن هنالك مشتركات كثيرة. عندما تكون هنالك مشتركات كثيرة تمثل كور للعمل، هذا يعني الجهد راح يكون أكثر إنتاجية وأكثر يعني تأثير في المجتمع وفي الفضاء السياسي وفضاء صنع القرار أيضا.
Thank you. Kag Mohammed Rauf, let me challenge you a little bit. You said that since 1991, PUK and KDP dominated the political system, and they've been the main winners through controlling main pillars of power, economy, security, and government. But wasn't it the case that in 2009, Goran change movement emerged and sent shockwaves through the system? Was that a genuine movement coming out from the Iraqi Kurdish society, or was it just a result of elite struggle within the PUK?
من پێم وایە ئێستا ئەو دۆخی کە ئێستا هەیە و ئەو دۆخی کە نەتیجەی ئۆپۆزیسیۆنی تایە ئێستا، من ئۆپۆزیسیۆنیشی جدی نابینم لە هەرێمی کوردستان، و بەشێک لە ئۆپۆزیسیۆنەکان هەم پاشکۆیەن یاخود هەم بەشێکن لە سیستەمە سیاسەکەی هەرێمی کوردستان، یا بەشێک بوونە یا بەشێکن، یاخود ئەوەی کە هەیە ئومێدی گۆڕانکاری لێ ناکرێت، هەم لەلایەک بەهۆی هێز و دەسەڵاتی پارتی دیموکراتی کوردستان و یەکێتی نیشتیمانی کوردستان، هەم بەهۆی ئەوەی کەم هێزانەش خۆیان هێزی یەکلاکەرەوە نین، هێزی ڕادیکاڵ نین. ئەمانە کۆمەڵە هێزێکن کە هەندێکیان لە پێناو بەرژەوەندی، هەندێکیشان بەڕاستی ئەمانە ئۆپۆزیسیۆن نین، پێیان ناوترێ ئۆپۆزیسیۆن. ینی بۆ نمونە خەڵک ئومێدی ئەوەی کە خەڵکی ناومێد کردووە بەر لە یەکێتی و پارتی هێز ئۆپۆزیسیۆنەکانن، خەڵکیان ناومێد کردووە لە هەرێمی کوردستان کە خەڵک ناچێت بۆ دەنگدان. با من یەک شتێک بە بەڕێزت بڵێم، ئەگەر شاری سلێمانی بکەین بە نمونە، من زیاتر قسەی ڕقەمێکم، لە شاری سلێمانی ساڵی 92 لە یەکەم خولی هەڵبژاردندا کە 450,000 کەس مافی دەنگدانی بوو، پارتی دیموکراتی کوردستان 92,000 دەنگی بەدەستێنا بە ڕێژەی لە 126. دوایین هەڵبژاردنی لە هەرێمی کوردستان کە دوایین هەڵبژاردن کرا 2021 لە کۆی 1,450,000 کەس دەنگدەر ئەوەی مافی دەنگدانی هەیە، پارتی دیموکراتی کوردستان 54,000 دەنگی بەدەستێناوە بە ڕێژەی لە 104. یەکێتی نیشتیمانی کوردستان ساڵی 2005 لە سلێمانیە 485,000 دەنگی بەدەستێنا بوو بە ڕێژەی نزیکی لە 170. دوایین هەڵبژاردن لە سلێمانیە لە کۆی 1,450,000 دەنگدەر، یەکێتی نیشتیمانی کوردستان کە حکومڕانی هەموو ئەم ناوچەیە تەنیا 124,000 دەنگی بەدەستێناوە بە ڕێژەی لە 108. بەڕێژەی لە 108 کۆی دەنگەکان، کۆی ئەوانی مافی دەنگدانن هەیە. ئێستا یەکێتی نیشتیمانی کوردستان لە سلێمانی حکومڕانە و هێزی هەیە و پارێ هەیە و مامەڵە لەگەڵ وڵاتانی ئەقلیمی شاکە. بۆیە هاوڵاتیانی هەرێمی کوردستان ناومێد بوونە لەوەی لە ڕێگەی سندوقی دەنگدانەوە بتوانی گۆڕانکاری بکەیت. ئەو گۆڕانکاریە ئێمە تازەترین هەڵبژاردن کە بڕیارە دەی 6 دەی حوزێران بەڕێوە بچێ و پێدەچێت دوا بخرێ بۆ مانگیدا 3,789,000 کەس مافی دەنگدانی هەیە. هێشتا نە حملەی هەڵبژاردن کراوە، نە هەڵبژاردن دەستی پێکردووە، لە ڕێوە 1,500,000 کەس ئەسەن کارتی دەنگدانی تۆمار نەکردووە، تا لە 127 کۆی ئەوانی مافی دەنگدانن هەیە هەر لە سەرەتاوە بڕیارە ناچن بۆ دەنگدان. بۆیە سەرڕای ئەوەی کە یەکێتی نیشتیمانی کوردستان و پارتی دیموکراتی کوردستان ناومێدیی گەورەیان دروستکردوە بۆ هاوڵاتیان بۆی دەنگ نەدا، لایەنە ئۆپۆزیسیۆنەکان دوو ئەوەنە ناومێدیان دروست کردو بۆ هاوڵاتیان بۆی دەنگ نەدا. و ینی دوێنێ جێگیری سەرۆکی حکوومەت باسی لەوە کرد کە ئێمە سەرکردەی زۆرمان هەیە بەڵام دەوڵەتمەدارمان نییە. من بە پێچەوانەوە پێم وایە ئێمە سەرکردەی زۆرمان نییە، ئەوەی کە هەمانە بەشێکی بازرگانی سیاسیە، بەشێکی مافیایە لە هەرێمی کوردستان، بەشێکی مافیای نەوتە، بەشێکی قاچاغیە. قاچاغی زۆر بە ئاشکرایە ئێستا. هێزە باڵەدەستەکانی هەرێمی کوردستان، چ یەکێتی نیشتیمانی کوردستان و چ پارتی دیموکراتی کوردستان و چ ئەوانەی کە لەناو حکوومەتان کە ئێستا بەشێکن لە شەریکایەتی دەواازەی سنووری خۆیان هەیە، قاچاغی خۆیان هەیە، مەساڵحی خۆیان هەیە. بۆیە بەڕاستی ئەمەوەیە کۆتا قسە هینم ئەوە بێت پوختیکەمەوە لەوەی کە ئەوەی لە هەرێمی کوردستان بەڕێوە دەچێت حکمڕانیەکی دیموکراسی نییە، حکمڕانی هاوڵاتی نییە و حکمڕانی ڕەشید نییە. ئەوە لە تێرمی سیاسیە پێی دەوترێت حکمڕانی کلیپتۆکراسی، واتە حکمڕانی سەتەکان لە هەرێمی کوردستان.
Thank you very much, Gag Mohammed. I'll come back to you with questions that we received from the audience, but I have a question for you. From the audience, how does Mr. Zaid see the potential to amend the Iraqi constitution in the light of the freeze of the political stalemate in here? And what is his vision regarding concluding a new social and constitutional contract in Iraq?
Okay, so I wouldn't support the idea of amending the text of the Constitution because it's too challenging. The requirements to achieve a constitutional amendment probably cannot be met, on the one hand. And second of all, because I don't think it's necessarily something that needs to be done in order to achieve the type of political reform that we need. Once again, Iraq, in my view, not everyone agrees. I know that there are some political forces in Baghdad who would prefer to establish a presidential system or a semi-presidential system, but in my view, that would be a huge mistake. It would be suicidal. It would open the door definitely to a return to dictatorship, and in any event would probably end democracy altogether because you wouldn't even be able to organize a presidential election because no one would come close to being willing to accept that their potential rivals could win an election. You no need to look further than Tunisia, Libya, and in other places where disaster has struck as a result of those types of arrangements. So it provides for a parliamentary system, and it also provides for a federal system. Now, on the federal system, what's missing is the detail. And if all you need to do is to compare Iraq's constitution, the 2005 constitution, with any modern federal constitution, not the United States because it's a very old text and very obsolete, but if you look at any modern federal system around the world, you'll see the huge amount of detail that goes into informing how a federation should work, because federations are complicated systems, they require detail, they require rules, and so on and so forth. You'll see that the ratio, the amount of detail that goes into, for example, the South African, the Brazilian constitutions, and you compare that with the Iraqi constitution, the ratio is like 20-1 in terms of amount of detail. That detail is lacking, it's missing in Iraq, and that's been the main problem, and there haven't been any meaningful political negotiations to try to fill in the missing gaps. That can be done through legislation. It doesn't have to happen by amending the text of the Constitution. Now, some people would argue that's a form of constitutional reform. That may be fine. However, I would not support, and I don't recommend that anyone supports, the idea of amending the text because you don't need it. All you need to do is to adopt the legislation that's missing. The type of legislation that needs to be adopted, I think everyone knows, right? So it would require a new oil and gas law, it would require an oil commission, all sorts of different things. And on the issue of the parliamentary system, I mentioned before that I don't think that we actually have a real parliamentary system. The reason why that is because our system, as provided for in the Constitution, provides full authority to the Parliament on every single meaningful issue, right? With practically no restriction. So Parliament decides the diplomatic class, it decides the composition of the Federal Supreme Court, the composition of the High Judicial Council. I mean, there's basically just no limitation whatsoever. What you would need to do is to cordon off, you would have to cordon off a certain segment of the bureaucracy of the state apparatus from political influence. You can't do it fully, of course. We have to coordinate at least partially to allow some type of autonomy to institutions like the court, like the security services, from deep political influence. Now, once again, you can't exclude it altogether, but at least partially. And the problem with our Constitution and the legislative framework is that it doesn't impose any meaningful restrictions at all on parliamentary behavior. Now, some people would say that you need to amend the text of the Constitution to achieve that. I would argue that you may not, right? It could probably be achieved. The main problem that we have in Iraq currently, setting aside how you would do it, is the political will and the willingness to engage in meaningful debate and dialogue about these issues, which once again has not happened in a meaningful way over the past 20 years. I really feel very strongly that the time has come. We have a very good amount of stability and security in the country. People are coming and going relatively easily. The types of obstacles that prevented political dialogue in the past don't exist. I mean, there are other issues that are being mentioned on the panel, which I very much I'm very concerned about for the reasons that people are evoking. However, I don't feel that it's impossible to engage in political dialogue on political reform in Baghdad. We've worked in Iraq, in Baghdad, and other places with other institutions. We have the chairman of Iraq Baghdad, who's here today. We've organized political dialogue on constitutional reform across the country, including in Mosul, in Najaf, in Basra, in Baghdad, in Erbil, and in other places. It's definitely achievable, but it should happen in a more sustained, in a more organized fashion over a period of years with a view to reaching agreement on these missing fundamentals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zaid. I have a question for both Mohammed Alwi and Fannour from the audience. Do you see any threat on civil society organizations coming from newly established NGOs and think tanks affiliated with militias or armed groups? We start with Noor and then we go to Mohammed.
ما أعتقد أنه يكون بهذا القدر، بس قد يكون يعني أنه هناك بعض التخوف يعني من قبل الحكومة من نشوء الكثير من المنظمات في الفترة الأخيرة. قد يكون أنه هي تهدد الواقع المجتمعي بصورة خاصة. لهذا أنه هناك أكو بعض التخوفات وبعض التعقيدات للمؤسسات المدنية، ولهذا أنه صار الكثير من التعقيدات الحكومية بهذا الموضوع. بعض التوجهات السياسية تعتقد أنه هي راح تخرق النسيج المجتمعي وتغير الأفكار والمعتقدات المجتمعية، لكن هي لا تصب بهذا المجال.
Thank you. Same question for Mohammed.
يعني أعتقد إذا إحنا نتكلم عن الجماعات الراديكالية المتطرفة، أنا أعتقد هذا القصد. يعني أنا أعتقد إذا الجماعات الراديكالية المتطرفة وصلت لمرحلة الإيمان بالمؤسسات المدنية ودخلت معنا في ساحة المنافسة، فهذا تطور في النظام الديمقراطي في العراق بصراحة. فلذلك احنا ندعم مثل هكذا خطوات إذا فعلا حدثت. يعني هذا أولا. اثنين، يعني تعقيبا على كلام أستاذ زيد وأيضا يعني على محور الحديث مال المنصة، الديمقراطية بالعراق تشهد تراجع على حساب يعني مؤشر الديمقراطية العالمي الديموكراسي اندكس اللي يعني تعمل عليه دائما الإيكونومست البريطانية. هذا التراجع طبعا نتيجة تراجع الكثير من المعايير. هذا الموضوع بصراحة يجب أن نتوقف عنده. يعني شنو السبب اللي جاي يؤدي إلى تراجع هذه المعايير حسب المعايير العالمية؟ يجب على المجتمع، النخب، الجامعات، مراكز التفكير، صناع القرار، البرلمان والحكومة أن يعني تولي أهمية قصوى لأسباب الحقيقية لتراجع الديمقراطية والعمل على معالجتها. ولكن أيضا أنا أعتقد ليس من الإنصاف أيضا أن يعني تطبق المعايير الدولية حرفيا على مجتمع مثل المجتمع العراقي وتجربة سياسية ديمقراطية كالتجربة السياسية العراقية. احنا إذا غير نتحدث بالبداية عن العراق كدولة، العراق كدولة تأسس 1920 في ظل منظومتين، منظومة دينية يرجع عمرها 1400 سنة بالتاريخ، ومنظومة قبلية يرجع عمرها أكثر من 6000 سنة في التاريخ. هذين المنظومتين، الدولة العراقية ولدت في 1920 عمرها 100 سنة، فهي مولود صغير في ظل هذين المنظومتين. الحالة الاجتماعية أو الطبيعة أو الطبائع المجتمعية اللي موجودة بالعراق تختلف، مو فقط في العراق، طبعا في العراق وفي دول الشرق الأوسط بصورة عامة، لكن العراق بصورة خاصة تختلف عن الطبائع والسلوكيات الاجتماعية اللي موجودة في دول الغرب. في دول الغرب هناك فردانية، يعني احنا في العراق وفي دول الشرق الأوسط هنالك حالة من الجماعاتية، حالة من الأعراف والقيم والتقاليد اللي متمسكين بها، خصوصا الجيل القديم يعني أكثر من الجيل الشاب. هذا الشيء يخلي يعني أكو مسؤولية إضافية علينا احنا كنخب، وعلى الباحثين وعلى الأكاديميين وعلى المشرعين وصناع القرار التشريعي أن يبحثوا عن أي شكل من أشكال الديمقراطية هو الملائم للمجتمع العراقي، لأن كل مجتمع يحتاج إلى شكل من النظام السياسي يكون متلائم ويا أمزجته ويا يعني تصوراته ويا طبائعه. فهذا الشيء أنا أعتقد شيء كلش ضروري. أكيد أنا ما جاي أدعو لأي بدائل باتجاه ديكتاتورية أو ما شابه من هذه الخيارات، لكن احنا نحتاج إلى بعض التكييفات، كيف نكيف المبادئ الديمقراطية مع طبيعة المجتمع العراقي، لأن أن تطبق المعايير حرفيا مثل ما هي في مجتمعات أخرى هذا راح يسوي تنافر ويسوي عدم نجاح، وهذا اللي شاهدناه خلال 20 سنة. نشوف نماذج مشوهة حزبية سياسية برلمانية إلى آخره، لأن النظام جديد على طبيعة المجتمع، خصوصا المجتمع عانى من حروب، عانى من حصار، عانى من جوع، عانى من ويلات، فلذلك نشوف هاي التشوهات. أنا أعتقد يحتاج نخفض سقف توقعاتنا ونتعامل مع الواقع كما هو، ونحاول نغير ونحسن به نحو الأفضل قدر الإمكان. تحياتي.
Thank you, Mohammed. Be more pragmatic. That's what you're saying. Kag Mohammed Rauf, so you've emphasized the hopelessness in the people generated by the dominant system or the dominant parties in the KRI. That said, we go home, we'll be ruled by the PUK and the KDP forever. What's the way forward? What's your advice? How do you see a way out of this domination?
دکتۆر من خەڵکم بێهوان هیوانە کردووە و زۆریش گەشتبینم بە گۆڕانکاری لە هەرێمی کوردستان، لەبەرەوەی ئێمە ئەگەر تەرکیزمان تەنها لەوە بێت کە ئۆپۆزیسیۆن یاخود هێزە ئۆپۆزیسیۆنەکان گۆڕانکاریەکەن، ئەوە من پێم وایە لەم دۆخەیە گۆڕانکاری بەوان ناکرێت. بەڵام هەر یەکێک ئێستا وشیاری زۆر زیاد بووە لە ناو تاکی کوردیە. بەشێک لەو بایکۆتەی کە هەبووە لە هەڵبژاردننی ڕابردووە لە کۆی 3,450,000 کەس 2,270,000 کەس نەچۆ بۆ دەنگدان، ئەوە نائومێدیە لەو هێزە سیاسیانی کە هەیە، نائومێدبوون نییە لە دۆخەکە. هەمیشە دەواازەی گۆڕانکاری هەیە لە هەرێمی کوردستان. یعنی تۆ سەیری کە بە بڕیارێکی دادگای فیدراڵی چی ڕووی نەدا لە هەرێمی کوردستان و بە بڕیارێکی نێودەوڵەتی بە بڕیار، یعنی من ناڵم چارەسەر لە ئێستاە چییە بۆ گۆڕانکاری، ڕەنبێ ئەمە وەزیفەی من نەبێ. بەڵام من گەشتبینم بەوەی کە خەڵکێکی زۆر وشیارە، ئەوە ئاستی دەنگدانە بە هێزە باڵا دەستەکان لە هەرێمی کوردستان بۆ شێوەی کە هەیە. لەبەرەوە خەڵک وشیار بۆتەوە لە ئەزانێ هەڵبژاردن دەواازەی گۆڕانکاری نییە، بەڵام دەکرێت کارکردن لە ڕێگەی دیکە، لە ڕێگەی دادگای فیدراڵی ئەوە ئێستا بینیمان، لە ڕێگەی دیکە گۆڕانکاری بێتەکایە فشار دروست بکرێت. بەڵام ئەم هێزانە پێگەی خۆیان بە تاواتی قایم کردووە. ئێستا هێزەکان ئەوەی کە دابەش بۆ بەسەر یەکێتی نیشتیمانی کوردستان و پارتی دیموکراتی کوردستانە، لە ناو ئەم هێزانەیە هێزەکان دابەش بوونە بەسەر کارکتەرە سیاسیەکانە. کارکتەرە سیاسیەکان بنەماڵە سیاسیەکان پێگەی خۆیان قایم کردووە لە هەرێمی کوردستان. گۆڕانکاری لەم واقعە کەمێک سەختە. تۆ لە ماوەی 30 ساڵی ڕابردوودا بە هەڵبژاردنە هەر ئەو بردوێتەوە، بەهێزە هەر لای ئەوە، پارێ لای ئەوە، نەوتە لای ئەوە، هەڵبژاردنە لای ئەوە، هەموو شتەکان لای ئەوە. لەبەرەوە گۆڕانکاری ئاسان نییە. من نائومێدیم دروست نەکرد لای هاوڵاتیان و شەقام، بەڵکو قسەکەی من ئەوە بوو ئەم ئۆپۆزیسیۆنەی کە هەیە ناتوانێت گۆڕانکاری بکات، چونی خۆیان مەساڵحیان هەیە، خۆیان بەشێکن لە سیستمە سیاسەکە، بەشێک بوونە لە حکوومەت، بەشێکن لەو دۆخە سیاسیی کە لە هەرێمی کوردستان هەیە. بەڵام لە هەمان کاتدا خەڵکێکی زۆر وشیارە لە هەرێمی کوردستان و دەواازەکانی گۆڕانکاری پێم وایە قورس نییە، هەم لەوەی کە ئێستا کۆمەڵە هەنگاو هەیە لە ڕێی بەغدا، لە ڕێی دادگای فیدراڵی، لە ڕێی نێودەوڵەتی، لە ڕێی هێزە هاوپەیمانەکانی هەرێمی کوردستان، پێدەچێت بتوانرێت لەمەوە فشار دروست بکرێت لەسەر ئەم دوو هێزە باڵەدەستە بۆ ئەوەی لانی کەم پێگەیان دەستیان کەم بکرێتەوە لە هێزی ئەمنی، لە ناو حکوومەت، لە ناو پرۆژە و لایەنە خزمەتگوزاریەکان. هیچ پرۆژەیەک لە هەولێر پرۆژەیەکی خزمەتگوزاری وجودی نییە ئەبێ ئیلان پشکی کۆمپانیەکانی پارتی دیموکراتی کوردستان یاخود کارکتەرە سیاسەکانی پارتی دیموکراتی کوردستانی تێدا نەبێ. هیچ پرۆژەیەک لە ناوچەی سلێمانی وجودی نییە ئیلان پشکی یەکێتی نیشتیمانی کوردستان یاخود کارکتەرە سیاسەکانی یەکێتی نیشتیمانی کوردستانی تێدا نەبێ. بۆیە بەرژەوەندەکان هێندە زۆرن بۆم دوو هێزە باڵەدەستەی کوردستان و بەشێک لە هێزەکانی دیکەش بە هەر یەکێتی و پارتی نەڵێن، هێزەکانی دیکەش بەشێکن لەو سیستمە سیاسی، بەشێکن لەو حکومڕانیە و بەشێکن لەو گەندەڵیەی کە هەیە، بەشێکن لەو دۆخە سیاسیی کە لە هەرێمی کوردستان دروست بووە. بۆیە دۆخێک چەسپیوە لە هەرێمی کوردستان، ئاسان نییە گۆڕانکاری، بەڵام وشیاریەکی گەورە هەیە چ لە ئاستی ناوخۆی هەرێمی کوردستان، چ لە ئاستی ڕەوەندی کوردی لە دەرەوە. فشارەکان زۆر بوون. من پێم وایە ئەم وشیاریە دوجار گڕوتینێکی گەورە ئەدا بۆ گۆڕانکاری لە هەرێمی کوردستان.
Thank you very much. And on that, we don't have time anymore. Thank you very much for your ideas and excellent explanation and analysis. And thanks for the audience for your question. Thank you.